Hello.
Hi Maha, how are you doing?
Okay, I guess. And you?
I'm fine. I'm doing fine here. We missed you this morning. I was wondering if you were also Giovanni, if you were fine because of global politics sessions.
Oh, yeah, I was good. I wasn't able to because I can't sleep at night, so
Sure,
like I wasn't able to wake up.
sure. No, and there's no compulsory as we know. It's just that usually you are over there and Giovanni as well, but we didn't see both of you. We saw Maria, by the way, this morning. Hola, Maria.
Yeah, I'm sorry. For me, it has been so hard to wake up in the morning.
I know, we know.
That's the truth. I'm sorry, Samuel.
Yeah.
I know it's 8 o'clock. It's already very early for us right now, eh?
Yeah.
Sure.
But how was the session? Was it interesting? I really like it seemed so interesting, but I wasn't able to wake up in the morning.
Well, Maria can tell you from a non-biased perspective because she was my friend. Yeah. Did you like it, Maria?
It was pretty interesting. I think that at least for me it was new, the fact that we are having like a new perspective other than like always talking about. Okay, we talk about the United States, but we talk about another perspective. I think that the person that you bring was talking a lot about Guatemala, and I think that it was pretty good because we have a contrast about different situations, and it was pretty interesting. I think I really like it a lot. I really like it, and I have like, I don't know, I think that I learned a lot from her.
Yeah.
So you can watch the recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'm gonna send the recording once it's ready, but you will have it and then you will see. It gave a little bit also perspective about how the elections may be influenced because of the Trump decisions this year in terms of the coronavirus and how it is being dealt in the USA. Yeah, so I think it triggered some questions. Alan was there as well this morning. So we were just talking a little bit for those who are just joining about global politics session this morning. And yeah, so so let's see, because last week you joined Julia's session, remember, which was
yeah, it was
question. Yeah, JP, go ahead.
oh yeah, I found it was sorry, I found it was very interesting how Trump's decisions will affect the next election as well.
Good. So coming back to economics, we want to move on with the topics that we have to cover. One of them is the circular flow of income, which I sent you the video that I recorded 2 weeks ago. Remember, today we're going to use maybe the first half an hour of today's session to clarify questions if you have about the circular flow. We want to move a little bit also on into GDP calculations. Sorry, we want to understand how to calculate the GDP from the three different methods. One is the income, the other one is the expenditure method, and the other one is the output method, okay? Once we have that, I hope today that we can also talk a little bit about the difference between gross national product versus gross domestic product, okay? These two concepts are important to understand the difference between both of them. And we're gonna end today's session with a short exercise so you can calculate GDP versus GNP. And we will review the answers, so we should be able to have something concrete learned today after the session. I hope it will not last longer than 1 hour and a half, including questions and answers. So it depends on how many questions do you have from now that we can use more or less time, okay? So if you want, let me just share the screen just to put us in the same page about what was the last session related with the circular flow of income. And I'm just gonna show you here what we were discussing. And I sent you via email this worksheet that, again, I'm wondering not all of you will have a printer around you. So I want to hear if you were able to open it. It was a Word document, if you saw it, and if you have it there in available, let's say, then that would be nice, because as we are unfolding with this session, you can actually make notes and maybe complete what we are going to be talking about. So anyone who has printed it, or maybe I just want to hear your reactions about if you were able or unable to print.
I have it, not printed, but I can make a Google Doc and edit it from there.
How about doing that, Alan? So a Google Docs that you can share with the rest?
Yeah, sure.
That would be nice. Thank you. Anyone else who were able or were not able to print, you can just share a little bit.
I wasn't able to print. I just have it as a document as well, like Alan.
Okay, good. So yeah, you don't need to print it. And I was just wondering how many of you would have access. I know some houses, they have printers in their house, they will allow you, but if not, that's not required. It's just to have that tool that may help you to make doodles as we are talking about, but also we can actually do it in our own notebook. Okay, so if you have a notebook nearby and you can, I would like you to keep taking notes as I'm gonna be talking today. So let's start with this idea of the circular flow of income. I'm not gonna stop a lot here because you should have seen that in the video that I sent you. The main idea is to explain using a model how the economy as a whole works. Okay, remember that now we're talking about macroeconomics, so we're talking about the economy as a whole. We are talking about not only one type of product that is being produced in the country, but everything that is being produced in the country. If Colombia produces coffee and flowers and let's say machinery, everything is being counted in the GDP of that country, and that's what we're talking when we talk about the circular flow of income. So let me just go here. And let's say if we have this model, we have been saying that there's this flow that is the real flow, is the black arrows that you see here. If there was a barter economy, then we can say households actually who are the owners of factors of production. We are as people, we are the owners of everything that can be used to produce, including money, labor, what's the land, and capital. Okay, so capital goods, and everything that we own is being sold actually to the firms, so they will actually convert those factors of production in goods and services. Okay, so that's these black arrows that we see. But because we live in a market-based economy, we're not just bartering things, but we pay for things. So we have the red arrows here, which are the payments of the factors of production here. Remember, wages, rent, dividends, and interests. And we have the consumer expenditure expressed in monetary terms, okay? So any monetary unit is going to be used in these red arrows. So very quickly, the circular flow of income in an economy that is a closed economy, we call it also, remember we mentioned it, autarkic or autarky. So an economy that is an autarky means an isolated economy, that everything that is being produced is being consumed without considering the rest of the world. So, but we know that that's not true. The world is interconnected, and now we know and we can experience how interconnected it is right now, isn't it? So let me just erase this. So we need to add other agents into this model, okay? We need to add the government, we need to add the banks, and we're gonna add the rest of the world, okay? So we're saying that whatever money that it was flowing inside the economy as income, sorry, I'm just gonna change the color here. So the income that households are receiving can be used to spend, inside the economy. But we said that a proportion of the income, if we have Y as income, a proportion is used for consumption. This is the big C. But then some of this income is going to be used flowing out of the cycle via taxes. That's a leakage or a withdrawal, via savings, or via import, we call it an M, import expenditure, okay? So these are the three leakages that actually drive the money out from the circular flow. And we are saying the other day that these leakages may be injected back into the economy via investment, okay? So investment means The banks are going to be giving loans to the firms so they can expand their production or they can start a new firm. That's called investment because firms are going to be investing in capital goods. Sorry, I think I have 2 questions here in the chat maybe. Okay, so Alan says that he's going to be sharing that later, not right now. Let me just put here the chat open for me to see. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the investment is one of the injections because we expect the money that went out via savings, then the banks are using that money to lend it to the firms. We also have government expenditure, which is a big G. So we have the big I, the big G. Government expenditure is the money that the government spends in order to produce public goods and merit goods, okay? And we have the last one, which is the export revenue, okay? So all the goods that firms are selling, but not inside the economy, but outside the economy, is coming back in terms of money as export revenue, okay? So we're saying the 3 injections are investment, government expenditure, and export revenue. So I'm gonna move on quickly. We're gonna actually have a 5 minutes space so you can ask questions just to clarify whatever has been said. So let me just summarize that the GDP is the total market value expressed in monetary terms of the final goods and services produced inside the boundaries of an economy. And that expression could be seen in this model. So please ask questions right now about the model in general, because then I can move on. Go Maria, and then Alan.
Sorry, a question. Is this presentation is gonna be shared with us, or is this in your webpage?
Yeah, it is in the webpage. It's called PC Video, and I think I just shared it with the video, with the email yesterday. Okay, so if you click on the link that I sent yesterday, you will see the presentation that I recorded just about the circular flow. Okay.
Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, like in the definition of the GDP, you explained to us that is the consumption of the final cake, of the final good.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't quite understand, like, why don't you take into account like the sugar, because you also pay that and some person is benefiting from that.
Great question. Okay, so the idea is that the GDP is going to be measuring the final goods that are going to be used either for final consumption, okay? They are going to be destroyed once you consume them, okay? Mm-hmm. Or we can even think about the machinery that is going to be used to produce other goods. Why the machinery? Because machinery is not destroyed when you use it. You are actually the machine is going to start to destroy it very slowly over time. We're going to talk about that. That's called depreciation. But once you buy the machine, it's like a new good that you're starting to use to produce other goods. Now, why the sugar, for example, is not counted in the GDP if we are using the sugar to produce cakes, okay? That was the question. So because the value of the cake, if we have a value of a cake that is, let's say, $10 per cake, okay? If the value of the cake is $10 and we use it actually, let's say $5 of sugar to produce this cake, so we're actually double counting because the value of the sugar is already counted in the price of the cake. So we cannot count the sugar that is being used and charge it in the final price of the cake. Now, let's say that you go to the market and you want to buy sugar for your coffee. You're not producing cakes. You just bought the sugar as a final good. So the sugar became a good that is being used for final consumption. You didn't transform the sugar for selling other goods. You use it for your final consumption. Unless you are a coffee shop that you bought the sugar to sell coffee with sugar, then you have to include the price of the sugar in the cup of coffee, isn't it? Let's say you're gonna charge $6 if you are using $5 of sugar plus the coffee, that will be counted in the GDP. Not the sugar that you use it, because this is already included in the $6 of the cup of coffee, the $10 of the cakes, and whatever is the sugar being used. Now, certain proportion of the sugar is gonna be part of the GDP as long as this sugar is being consumed as a final good, okay?
Mhm.
It's not used to produce other goods. So
So then, like when the supermarkets, for example, sell to my father that has a restaurant and my mother, then they don't count that meat like in the GDP, just when we sell
yeah,
the final plate?
that's a great question, because you may say, well, how will differentiate when you are buying the sugar in the market for you and the sugar for someone else that is making, like your parents, okay? So the way of discounting it is when your parents declare that they are producing goods in the restaurant, they have to say our costs are this amount and our profits are this amount. So actually the government will make that discount by saying the sugar that they bought in the market this year, we are discounting it from the profits that they make by selling food in the restaurant. So actually your parents do not do that, but the government who is gathering the information will see in their accounting sheets that there are costs and revenues in the restaurant, and part of the cost is the sugar that they already paid in the restaurant, in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds
Okay.
makes sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
you don't do that operation. The central bank or the statistics office of the government is the one that is making the discounts, so they count only the final goods.
I have a question. Yeah,
Go
is it
ahead.
only the things that are like, what if they produce too much and it's actually like not everything that's produced is bought, if it makes sense, isn't it? Like not very reliable.
Yeah, so we have to think that all of these values and measures are are not accurate. Okay, that's something to have in mind. This has lots of flaws because many things cannot be measured. Many things are just estimates, and sometimes even what you're saying, Maha, not everything is recorded. Okay, so yes, the GDP is just the approximation of what is being produced with the data that is available. Some countries are not able to gather everything, all the data together because it's too expensive to gather everything that is being used in the country. Sorry, so they just estimate more or less how much the economy produces. However, that more or less is pretty close to real life, okay, to pretty accurate. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later in a couple of slides that there are some problems of measuring everything that is being produced. For example, as we're saying, the illegal economy. Okay, the illegal economy, there's no way that we can see that was actually traded in a country because it's illegal. So think about if someone was selling sugar that is produced. Let's think about coffee, that is very easy, or fruits. In so many of your countries, fruits, you can just pick the fruits from the trees and sell them in the road. How many of you have seen those selling fruits in the road? We see it here in Mechosin when you are just driving away. You see also the eggs that the people just sell because of their local farms. That money is not counted anywhere because the government is not really counting the money of selling those eggs in the streets, the fruits in the streets. Those is what we call informal economy. That is not counted. And we may say, well, then the GDP of Canada should be way bigger because lots of the economy is being traded in these very small farms. And of course, that's true. So remember here at Pearson, we have the greenhouse. Whatever we consume in the greenhouse is not counted in the GDP of Canada because we're actually producing it here and we're not paying for it. We're just consuming it immediately at the cafeteria. If we were buying that spinach in the market, it should have been counted in the GDP of Canada. Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I was thinking, for example, the house and the land, is that counting in the GDP if you buy the house like 20 years ago?
Good question. Land is not counted in the GDP unless you are actually producing something above that land. Okay, so anything that is being used, or that land is being used to produce something new, then that new is counted in the GDP. There's a lot of land in many countries that is just spare land. So remember, that's something else that we didn't talk about. Remember the externalities or the green services. So if just a piece of land is producing, let's say trees is just producing oxygen, and you own that land, if you were able to account the money that oxygen will represent, then that money should be counted in the GDP. But actually the oxygen is an externality. is not counted. So only if you cut the trees and you sell the trees, that is going to be counted in the GDP, because now you're engaging into a market transaction. Before, that land was not even existing in the GDP.
And the rent does count, doesn't it?
Rent only if, yes. So when you build a house, if you're selling the house, it's counted in the GDP. But then once the house is being sold, and that rent after the house is being sold does not count it, because the house has a value when it's being sold, okay? So rents are not counted in the GDP.
Mm-hmm.
More questions?
Samuel, I got a question about the graph again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The
model.
Yeah, the model. So basically, we have households and firms, but if we want to add government and banks, government or like banks in this case, do we add it in what we call leakages? Is that true? Like taxes, savings, and imports, exports?
Good.
No.
Thank you for the question, Giovanni, because let's define the government, let's define the banks, and let's define the rest of the world, as we call it, ROW, as three different agents, okay? They are agents as households is another agent, and firms are another agent. I'm sorry, I'm making a mess here, but I'm learning how to use this tool. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 economic agents: households, firms, governments, banks, and rest of the world. Now, the leakages is the flow of money. Actually, the money is flowing out of the system because of taxes, okay? So actually, the agent that is using that money is the government, but the leakage is called taxes, okay? That's the leakage. The way that the money is getting out, flowing out of the system is via taxes. But then we have government expenditure. Remember, the expenditure that the government does, that's the injection, okay? Banks is the agent, but the leakage is called how? How is it called, the leakage?
Can you repeat that?
The leakage is called savings, isn't it?
Savings.
The flow of money is called savings. Who is actually getting those savings? Actually, the agent, which is the bank, okay? The agent is just the institution. And then the banks will actually reinject that via investment, okay? So investment is the I that we define, okay? So the flow is what we're looking at as a leakage or as an injection. And the third agent is the rest of the world. The rest of the world will actually, the money is leaked out to the rest of the world when we import goods, because we are actually spending money and the money is getting out of the flow. And actually we are injecting money from the rest of the world with the export revenue. When we sell goods to the rest of the world, we receive back money. So the leakages and the injections is the money flowing out or the money flowing in, depending on these three economic agents, which is government, banks, and rest of the world. Alan.
And Samuel, I think you told us that the merit goods, if I'm not wrong, they are not counting. Are they counted? Like the merit goods as education and health?
Yes, so yes, they are counted because we are paying for them via taxes, okay? So because we are paying for them via taxes, then this is actually what the government is receiving in terms of money when they are spending into public education, for example, okay? Mm-hmm. So it is counted. Now, what is not counted are the externalities, okay? Whatever we are not paying in money is not counted in this model. This model does not actually consider natural resources or the environment or even cultural, the culture of a, we have talked about that. Remember, the culture of a country is not really counted because you cannot measure it. So all of that is an externalities away from the model, okay? Now, merit goods, education, and all of that is counted, not because you pay directly for them in the school, but you are paying indirectly via taxes. The taxes is the money that the government is using to spend in teachers and schools and books, etc.
Okay, and they are counted via taxes and also as investments.
We call it public investment, but let's define it more easily and more clearly as government expenditure. Okay, that's the big G.
Okay.
Later we will have, in a couple of slides, we will see how this big G will make sense to you, because the government expenditure is the amount of money that the government is using to pay for teachers, for medical doctors, for medicines, for vaccination, everything that the government is spending directly to the economy. Now, who is selling, let's say, who are the teachers? Teachers as me are people like you. Who are the doctors? Also are people. So the money is flowing directly into people. But also, let's say that now, as we are seeing in the world, the governments, they need masks and they need respirators. Who produces these machines and these masks? The firms, okay? So the governments are buying those from the firms using government money, which is the taxes, okay? So once the government spends, the money is flowing into the system. If the government is not spending, then the money is not flowing into the system yet. And just something to finalize this question is, if the government is providing subsidies to people, that's not counted as government expenditure, okay? Because government only is counted as expenditure when they are contracting or paying for a particular service. If they are just giving away the money and you don't know if the money is gonna be used or not, like a subsidy, that's not counted as government expenditure, okay? Subsidy technically is defined as a negative tax, okay? If the government tells me, pay me $100 in tax and I will give you $50 back as a subsidy, then the net tax is 50, okay? Because the government is just giving you away. So the net tax is what we're looking at when we talk about the leakages, okay? This T is net taxation or taxes minus subsidies. Subsidies, just to finalize, are not government expenditure. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a question concerning something that you explained in the video about banks. So you said that households are going to give savings to banks, and then banks are going to lend this money to firms, and then the firms are going to give back the, like, so that's the investments, and then firms have to give this money back to the banks with an interest rates. And I was just wondering if households, when do they get the money back with interest rates as well, or do they just get their money the way they put it?
Good question too, Maha. So we said that once you put your money into the savings account, there's what we call the passive interest rate, okay? The passive interest rate is the interest rate that banks pay you for putting away your money in a savings account. If the passive interest rate, let's make it a very high one. Let's say if it's 5%, then these banks are attracting you to put your money here because they want to have money in order to lend it to the firms, okay? Now, they are gonna be paying you this 5% because they are gonna be charging to the firms a little bit more. Let's say they will charge 7% of interest rates for lending the money to the firms. That's called the active interest rate, okay? Active interest rate is the interest rate that banks charge for lending money. So the difference between the passive and the active interest rate is called spread, okay? The spread actually 7 minus 5. So this bank is gaining 2% of profits. That's the business of the banks, okay? Now those profits are now gonna be counted in the GDP. But so far we're saying the difference between the leakage and the injection and this 5% and 7% is actually the interest rate that the banks are charging and giving back to the firms when they receive back their money after a certain period of time with the interest rate included.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All of these will be very interesting in the next session because we will talk about how all of these influences the recession that we are about to see in the world and how the policies are created in order to enhance consumption, because the opposite of what we are looking here is a recession, okay? So a recession will mean firms are not producing goods, then households are not selling their factors of production. That means national income is decreasing, and because you have less money, you consume less goods, and that will create like a snowball, okay? That's a recession. The economy actually is shrinking, whereas in the regular times of prosperity, this economy should be enhanced or growing, as we call it GDP growth. So using this basic model, we can just look at how the economy in general works, and the idea of investment is a very important idea because if the firms who are there, let's say you guys, you are intelligent and you have ideas. Right now, maybe how many of you may have already an idea of how to make money in the pandemic? Some of you may say, well, people are not coming to the hotel of my parents. How can we make money? Or Giovanni is saying, well, maybe I want to buy something here. I don't have money. How can I make money? So you have ideas of how to make money. Now, maybe you're going to start making these masks and then make a nice design and you're going to start selling them online. For that, you need money. Who's going to be giving you the money? The banks. The banks are going to be lending you the money. You start your business. You start selling your goods. Once you start making your profits, you're paying back the investment that you made to the banks plus the interest rate. So that is important because part of the cost of producing your goods has to include the interest rate that you have to pay back to the banks. We'll come back to that concept later when we talk about the policies to redress recession as we see it happening in the world now. Okay, can I move on? Anyone else has a burning question? Good. And Alan, you can lower your hand now. Thank you. So let's very quickly move on what is included and what's not included in the GDP. Goods and services produced by the firms, only the legally produced goods and services are included. Only final goods, remember we said already that the intermediate goods are not included. Not included the illegal economy. People that whatever is being produced for themselves is not included in the economy. I can imagine in Peru, in Latin America, maybe some African countries, even some South Asian countries, and some Middle Eastern countries, many people produce their goods for themselves. Think about bread that you are producing for your own consumption, and raising your own chickens, and raising your own corn. All of that is not counted in the GDP because you are producing it for yourself. You are not buying that into any market. You're just producing it. So some economies are underestimating their GDP because if they counted all these indigenous practices of self-subsistence, the GDP should be bigger in monetary terms. The thing is that money does not exist because you're actually producing for yourselves. Just to have that in mind. Let's keep moving on. Let me just, yeah, okay. Volunteer activities are not counted in the GDP because nobody's paying you to do that. For those who are in Kule, for example, if you go and help building a school in Africa, in any country in Africa, then that is not counted in the GDP, even if you are producing, helping to produce a new building. And yeah, we said that intermediate goods are not included. So let's make a little test here. So I would like people who haven't talked to answer each of these questions. The first question is, and maybe the rest you can just note what would be your answer. Is this included in the GDP? Let's say you charge your neighbor $10 to cut their grass. Let's say today, and then you go because the grass is too high. Now you are, even if you are illegal in that country, you are still going to be cutting the grass. So me, are you there? Me? I haven't seen if me joined. Let's say Jennifer. Jennifer, what would you say? Is this included in the GDP or not?
No.
And why not?
Because it's not a formal kind of economic activity.
Good, and that's the answer. Unless you have a business of cutting grass and the business is registered and then you give a receipt, that will be the situation in that is counted in the GDP. But if you're just doing it tomorrow and you cut the grass and then you receive $10 from the neighbor and that's it, it shouldn't be counted in the GDP. It's informal economy. Let's say this next one. Declan, if you are there, what do you think? Is this counted in the GDP?
I'd say no, because it's an injection from the state.
Okay. Now we have defined it as the GDP as also the injection because it's what people spend, and someone is selling that furniture or all the what is being involved to produce that stadium is being
Okay.
sold to someone. In this case, the government. So the government is buying it. So in this case, it is counted in the GDP,
Okay.
isn't it? Yeah.
Okay.
So it is because it's new and it's been spent by the government, not by households, but the government. So it is an injection. All the injections, just by the way, are counted in the GDP. Jamie, what would you say?
Not included in GDP?
Why increasing tourism is not included from the GDP?
Because it is not a monetary measure.
Okay, that's a good answer. If we think about just people wandering around without spending any money, that could be a correct answer. If we think
it isn't people from the country.
Good. Now, this is an interesting one because remember that we said that if we are selling stuff to the rest of the world, that could be counted as an export. Now, tourism is counted as an export, in fact, because what are we selling to the rest of the world? Our country. We're selling our scenery, we're selling our culture, we're selling our food. Why people come to our country? Because they want to consume our country, as we put it in those terms. So actually we're selling our country. So tourism is an export revenue. So it will be counted in the GDP because someone is paying for all these services, including taxis, hotels, restaurants, even just paying in the national parks when you get into the national park just to see the scenery. That money is entering into the country as part of selling something, which in this case is just the tourism services. Does that clarify, Jamie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. I don't know who else. I don't see everyone here. Let's see if I can ask directly to someone. Oh yeah, William, what would you say with this next example?
It's not counted in the GDP because it's informal or illegal.
In this case, it's both, isn't it? It's informal and illegal, okay? Not counted. How about this one, Giovanni?
It's not because it's not a final good. It's an intermediate good.
Excellent. That was the question of Alan, and this is the example exactly. Is not counted, but the cakes are counted, not the sugar used to produce the cakes. And Derek, if you are there and you're not sleeping because maybe I bore you, but hopefully you are not asleep, let's look at this, another one. You spend $15 to buy noodles. However, the noodles were made 100% in another country. So that $15 are you going away. Is that counted in the GDP or not?
It's counted in the GDP.
And why do you think? Is it counted in the GDP inside your country, even if the money just went out?
Sorry, I don't really understand the question.
Sure, no, good. And what we're saying is that because let's say that you are not in China, let's start with that. And we buy the noodles and the noodles were made 100% in China. Even the package and everything is being produced in China. So you just bought it directly. This is a very weird example, but let's say the $15 went away from the country and they went to China. So it's actually counted in your GDP as a negative flow because the money went out of your country. So it went out of your, as a leakage and never came back. So the $15 is a negative in your GDP. So it's counted, but as a negative sign, okay? It's being discharged from your GDP. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Good. And the last question, Maha, what would you say about this one? If you are familiar with Value Village, guys.
I think it's counted. Like, is Value Village a formal business? I guess it is counted.
Okay.
Or maybe not, because like the shoes were bought in the first place, right? So like it's only someone else buying used shoes. I don't know. I think maybe I'm confused.
Good, and thank you, because the questions are actually confusing questions. I wanted these questions to be actually confusing for you to think about. If we're thinking about used shoes, The shoes are already being produced and bought by someone new. And remember that we said that the GDP only considers new goods produced and sold. In this case, the shoes were already counted in the GDP when they were bought as new pair of shoes. However, Value Village is just collecting all this junk and reselling it. So the shoes, they don't have a value itself anymore as a new good, but what you are paying in Value Village, let's say that the shoes were, the price was $5. So actually the $5 that you're paying in Value Village is not because of the shoes, but it's because of the service that Value Village is giving to you by giving you the availability or putting you available these junk, okay, or these pieces of shoes or used stuff.
Samuel.
Yes, go ahead, Declan.
Sorry. So if you buy something off of Amazon, for example, that doesn't count towards your GDP because Amazon's an American company, or?
Okay, that's another good question to confuse us because we say, well, actually the GDP is, remember as a definition, is whatever is being produced and sold inside the boundaries of a country. If you buy anything from Amazon, it's counted on the GDP in the USA because they are actually selling the stuff from the USA to the rest of the world. It's an actually export revenue for them, okay? Assuming that the Amazon goods are produced in the USA, let's simplify it by saying everything that is being sold by Amazon is produced in the USA, because we can complicate things later. But yes, so Amazon sells goods, is counted on the GDP of the USA because Amazon is based on the USA.
Okay.
What about shoes? Like, would they count in the GDP or no?
Sorry, you're asking about?
Like the shoes at Value Village.
So what you pay at Value Village, because it's a legal firm, it's a legal based commerce, whatever you pay in Value Village is counted in the GDP of Canada, but the value that you are paying is not because of the shoes, but because of the service of Value Village as a business putting you the shoes available for you. So we can just say, technically, you're not paying for the shoes. The shoes are just whatever you bought, but you're paying only $5 because of Value Village giving you that service. So Value Village store is counted on the GDP, but the shoes themselves, they are not counted. They already were counted when they were sold as new shoes, okay? Everything that we buy secondhand is, if we're buying it from a friend, is not counted in the GDP. If we buy it in a local, thrift store or Value Village, we are paying and the money is actually being registered legally. That money is entering and counted in the GDP, but not because of the good that you bought, but because of the store that is charging you the service of selling stuff there.
Samuel, can I ask you a question? Like you just said, the GDP was whatever was produced inside the boundaries of an economy. However, like the formula that we had included exports minus imports. So do imports count in the GDP or no?
Thank you for the question. The answer is yes, it's included as a negative sign. It's counted, but you have to subtract it from the GDP. So minus imports, okay? So anything that we buy from the rest of the world has to be subtracted.
No, because we also spoke about exports. Like you said, exports minus imports, remember, like they don't even out. So whatever you produce outside of the economy, let's say Amazon, is not actually produced inside the US or Apple or whatever. Like
okay, and I saw your hand, William, but I just want to clarify this question. Remember that we're saying produced and sold inside the country. Let's say, I'm going to complicate your answer, but just to make sure that we clarify that question, Maha. If you produced something inside your country, but you used some input from another country, okay? So actually that input from another country has to be subtracted from your GDP because the money flow out of your country. Then you are selling that good that you produced in your country and you're selling it to another place, okay? Like Amazon. If Amazon is buying cellular phones from Japan, they pay $100 to Japan. So that money went out of the USA and they are selling the cellular phones $150 and you bought it in Canada. So actually the money is flowing into the USA as an export revenue, as 150, but then they have to subtract what they paid as an import expenditure to Japan, 100. So whatever stays in the USA is the $50 remaining. That is the exports minus imports, if that example makes sense.
Okay, and what about if they produce like up, let's say they have factories in China, like Nike has factories in China, but it's an American company.
Yes.
Count for China or American GDP?
Good question. We will go to that in the next slide because that's the difference between GDP and GNP, which is a different concept. Okay, so we're gonna leave your question for 2 slides more. Okay. William.
Earlier in global politics, we were talking about how there are a lot of Guatemalans who work in the US and send money home. Is that money included in the GDP or is that not?
Okay, that's a good question as well. It's not, okay, so how it's being counted is important. The income that people are receiving inside the USA is counted in the GDP of the USA, okay? So let's say all the immigrants that are in the USA, even if they are illegal, usually even that money is counted because they have to report that they are paying wages, okay? So that money is counted in the GDP of the USA, even if it was produced by Guatemalans and Mexicans who are illegally living inside the USA. It's counted inside the GDP. Once the money gets out of the country as remittances, we will talk about that later, okay? Because the money is flowing out, but it's not an export and it's not an import, okay? It's just a decision of the income to be sent out, and that's the same question as Majas, okay? So we're gonna refer to that when we talk about GNP in 1 second.
But Samuel, does the income count in the GDP? It's not the final product?
Yes, remember that we were saying that the GDP is also everything that is being consumed means that someone bought it, okay? And someone bought it because they have money, okay? Think about the model. Let's go back here. Think about this model of autarky. Everything that is being produced inside the boundaries of the country is being consumed inside the boundaries of the country, okay? So the GDP is everything that is being produced and consumed inside the boundaries of the country, including the money that is coming from outside when we produce something and is being sold outside, minus what we buy from the rest of the world. So income is part of the GDP of the country because with the income we consume goods and services, okay? So the income is the amount of money that we use for consumption, and it's also the amount of money that we use as a payment of the factors of production that we are selling to the firms. So that's the basic
you cannot double count it, isn't it? Like you just need to count it once.
Yes, but remember that income is a different concept than consumption. Income is what you have, consumption is what you spend, okay? So we have two different things. You cannot say that you are doubling counting the income plus the consumption because that's not double counting. Income is what you have and you use that money to consume, okay? So it's not double counting, it's just you have $100 as income, you consume the $100 as an expenditure. So that is when the GDP takes place because you are buying goods from others. So the money becomes the GDP in terms of income or the GDP in terms of consumption. But these concepts are not the same. You're not saying you are double counting. No, you're just saying the income is one thing and the consumption is a different thing. Now the production is also what you consume. The production shouldn't have all the goods that are being used to produce the goods because otherwise you're inflating the GDP. If you count the steel plus the sugar plus the whatever, the wheat and whatever is used to produce one cake, then you are actually counting the sugar and the steel as part of the GDP plus the cake, then you are double counting in that case, which was the example that we clarified before.
So then there's like two GDPs, like the ones that are like wage, rents, dividends, and the other one that are consumer expenditure.
Yes, these are two ways of measuring the GDP. And there's another way. So just to summarize, one way of measuring the GDP is everything that is being produced. Remember, all the goods and services produced. That's one way. Everything that is being consumed, that's another way. We expect that everything that is being produced is consumed. But that's not always true, because sometimes you produce more and people are not consuming it and it's still there. But we expect eventually to be the same amount because people will consume it eventually, okay? Eventually meaning in the future. And the last way of measuring the GDP is income, okay? So everything that is being paid to produce goods and services is the income. So these three methods should be the same amount of money. Should be. Now, in real life, it's not. Why? Because let's say that you have $100 right now. You're not spending it right now. You're spending a certain proportion now. You're saving a certain proportion in the future. You maybe you lost $20 and nobody knows where it is. Maybe your little brother just destroyed. So it's not the same amount always. So in theory, they should be the same amount, but we will never have this exactly same amount in real time, because time matters when we are spending and when we are receiving the money. I just got paid yesterday, but I haven't spent all my money. So if they measure the GDP today, the income of me will be more than the expenditure of me. But eventually I will spend all my money until I receive back the income. And then again, that discrepancy is going to be reflected in the GDP when we measure in terms of income, in terms of consumption, and in terms of production, okay? You will get that clarified as we move on, okay? I'm sure you will get it.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So let's summarize here the GDP in terms of expenditure. Let's focus just on the expenditure side, okay? We are saying that who spends the money? People, okay? We call it households. We spend money by buying pizza and buying t-shirts and buying computers. Everything that we consume as final goods is gonna be this big C, okay? C of consumption, okay? Consumption is done by households. So that's the big C. Who else consumes in a firm, in a country? Firms. Firms, they will consume whatever they need to produce more goods and services. So that's called investment, okay? So we're saying with the income that is generated in a country, some people use that income for consuming goods and services. Some firms are gonna be using the money to invest. The government is gonna be using part of the money to produce education, health services, roads, whatever is being considered as important as public and medical goods. So this is the government expenditure, and we call it G. And the last, who else is gonna be consuming goods that we produce locally in the economy? We already said people, firms, government, but also the rest of the world. The rest of the world will buy our goods, so that's the export expenditure. Sorry, export revenue. So now we have a situation here. Everything that is being produced in a country is being consumed by households, by firms, by governments, and by the rest of the world. Minus, we will subtract, minus what we inside this country buy from the rest of the world. That's our import expenditure, okay? So what we have here is our equation of GDP measured in terms of expenditure. C, I, G, and X minus M, that would be the net expenditure of a country when we talk about how the country is spending their money. So I just summarize here, C, I, G, and X minus M is the total GDP of a country. Because remember that the GDP is everything that has been produced, okay, is consumed by whom? Households, firms, government, and the rest of the world, okay? The net rest of the world, because we're subtracting what we also need to buy from the rest of the world. If this is just goods and services that is consumed, actually we have to add here the income. So the national income of a country is being used to consume goods, to consume capital goods, to consume merit and public goods, and to consume imports, minus in this case will be what other parts of the world are providing us. So as a summary, here's more clean. if you want to memorize something, please memorize this equation, okay? We don't want you to memorize it, but this is something we will use from now on. GDP is going to be the same as CIG X minus M. So the value of the consumption, investment, government, and export revenue minus import expenditure is going to be the total output of a country. In other words, the local consumption plus the injections, okay? Injections. Remember the circular flow, the local consumption plus all the three injections that we define, they should add up to the total household consumption, the total household income, or the total country's production, okay?
Where will that profit go?
The profit goes to the firms, the wages go to the workers, the rent goes to the landowners, and the interest go to the banks. So remember that all the factors of production that are being paid are part of the economic agents of the circular flow. So to summarize, we're almost wrapping up, but to summarize this lesson, let's define the total expenditure of a country, which we have just mentioned as CIG X minus M. This is the total demand. Who is demanding? We already said, firms, households, government, the rest of the world. So we call it aggregate demand, the total demand. So where are they receiving these goods? From the producers. So the aggregate supply is actually supplying to the aggregate demand. We expect everything that is being produced to be consumed by these guys that we have defined before. So the macroeconomy will be in equilibrium when everything that is being produced is consumed. So we can say the GDP of a country from the consumption side is the same from the production side, okay? If we spend $1 trillion because of all these different reasons, is because there was $100 trillion produced in this economy. Let's give a pause here, and actually this session is being recorded if you want to review it later. Let's just finish by giving you some data from countries, okay? This is the UK. If we can check the value of the GDP from the consumption side, okay, from the expenditure, let's name it as we know, this is the aggregate demand of the UK. Aggregate demand is the consumption plus investment plus government plus the net exports. Anyone who would like to intervene here telling us, what do you see? What's happening with the UK's economy? Just looking at this graph, let's build a story behind the UK economy looking at these figures.
I think it's degrowing because they have a leakage due to the exports. And I also see that most of their GDP comes from consumption.
Good, that's the type of analysis we want to make. Exactly, that's what we want to do. So we're saying, first of all, the biggest chunk of the GDP is being consumed by households, okay? So 70% of whatever is being produced in the UK is consumed by households. Then 16% by firms. Actually, the government is pretty strong there. Almost 20% of the GDP is being consumed by the government. It could be because they have a big health service, as we now know in the news. You see how the hospitals, public hospitals in the UK are so strong, but also they have public education, they have libraries, they have a strong government. So 20% or 20 cents for each dollar or each British pound actually is spent because of the government, or the government spends 20 cents out of each dollar. But as Alan was saying, there's a leakage. So actually they are spending more in imports than what they are receiving in terms of exports. So actually they depend, their GDP depends, 5 cents of their GDP depends on foreign goods, okay? They are spending almost 5 cents of their $1 to buy foreign goods. Maybe there are bananas that they cannot produce inside their country. Maybe there's Nutella because, again, they don't produce it inside the country, et cetera, okay? So that's what they are spending from the rest of the world. Let's move on and let's see if someone else wants to tell the story of India. This is India's GDP or aggregate demand in terms of CIG X minus M. Let's build a story. Whatever is happening in your head by looking at this graph is correct. So let's just share it.
Well, we can see that India's GDP is also reliant on household consumption, but also on investments, which do take a pretty important part of the GDP. And concerning exports and imports, we can see that it is a positive injection. So they probably export more than they import, which adds up to the GDP.
Excellent. Thank you, Maha. That's a great analysis. That's the type of analysis which looks kind of easy to make, but that's the type of analysis that economists try to do when they look at a graph like this. We may say, well, India's GDP is actually driven a lot by consumption, but also they have a higher proportion. Remember, the UK had 16% of investment. Now these guys have 30% of investment. That means that they are building an economy that is going to be more productive in the long run, because investment means capital goods. And they also are exporting more than what they are importing. So that means that their inflow of currency is entering more than what they are spending to the rest of the world. That's something positive for their economy. Maybe the bananas that they are producing are the ones that the UK is consuming over here. And then government consumption is pretty, let's say, not that big, is 9.8%. But because we're talking about big government, well, a big amount of money, maybe this has a lot. But still, in proportion terms, is way less than the UK. Remember, the UK had a big, strong government. India does not, compared to the UK. Okay. Let's see who wants to go to the next one. Now we have China, and this is more tricky to read, but let's see. This is the Chinese GDP in terms of private household consumption, but also government consumption. So that means that the government is also buying final goods. And also we have the investment, which is the private investment. They call it market driven. And also the public investment. So this is government investment. So this is part of G, government G, but it is also part of G, okay? They may be consuming final goods for, providing food to their teachers, for example. And they have the X minus M. So this is the proportion of the GDP, and this is the total amount in renminbis. So who would like to tell us what story can you build behind the Chinese GDP compared to what we just saw before, or anything that you want to say when you look at these numbers and their proportion on the GDP? Let's build a story about China's GDP based on their consumption.
Okay, I think China has a growing GDP, mainly because the export surplus is a big injection, and they have a lot of investment.
Good, that's a good one to look at. If you're looking at market investment, which is private firms investing, 23%, almost 1/4 of its total GDP is of firms investing in goods and machinery, let's call it, factories. But also 25, almost another quarter of the GDP is government public infrastructure. So almost half of the GDP of China is now being used to produce or to make the economy more productive in the future. They are also selling a lot of stuff to the rest of the world. So this is a very, we may say, healthy economy that is actually, we may expect that economy to grow in the future, as you were saying, JP. Now the future for China now is today, because this is very old. This is 2009, so it was almost more than 10 years ago. So maybe now they are receiving the profits of all this investment that they have been doing in the last 10 years. And you see the government consumption is still here quite big. And the household consumption is pretty small compared to the other countries. Remember, the UK 70% household, the India 57%. China is just 35% of household consumption. At least that was in 2009. And maybe Jennifer can think about, well, maybe lots of goods and services are provided by the communist government, maybe, and that's why people don't pay directly in the market for education or health because it's already provided by the government. But maybe not, okay? So we are just speculating here. Any questions so far with these figures? I'm gonna move on with 2 more slides and then we're gonna wrap up. Let's move here. This is Canada. Maybe William, would you like to refer to what do you see here in the Canadian GDP based on the aggregate demand of Canada?
Well, we see, I think that the GDP is growing, but not by that much, because we see that Canada has a negative export. So it imports more than it exports. So it's losing some there. But otherwise, it's also the government investment is actually not that high. It's only about 4%, which seems low in comparison to the other countries. So maybe the government is not investing quite enough in Canada, and that might hurt Canada in the long run. But otherwise, it looks like there's a lot of good expenditure and investment in the others.
Okay, thank you, William. And just to put this into the right context, just for us to be clarifying, this is not the rate of change over time, but it is how the total GDP is distributed, or how people are spending from the total GDP. So almost 60% is what we spend here in Canada, including your expenditure. When you go to Metrosin Cafe while you're in Canada, that's counted in part of this consumption of expenditures of households, which is you guys when you are here at Pearson College. Is my expenditure when I buy, the food, the groceries, and the gasoline, whatever I'm spending here in Canada. Now, government expenditure, this was a number that maybe William missed. 22% is part of the government expenditure plus the government investment. The difference between government expenditure and government investment is that this is investment in infrastructure and some capital goods, but the expenditure has to do with final consumption of goods. So also the government may be spending a lot in medicines, in vaccinations, in maybe fuel, maybe final goods that are used to provide all this healthcare for people. Canada has a big healthcare system, as you know, which maybe is also explained in this 22%. Oh, I did something here wrong. I saw your hand. I think it was Alan. Go ahead.
Yeah, you just explained it. I will put it down once I figure it out how.
Okay, so you're okay? Let's move on. I'm gonna ask Jamie to look at the GDP of the USA based on the aggregate demand. Again, this is in the amount of money, but this is the percentage that we have been looking at before. What is the story that you can tell of the USA behavior in terms of the different agents using their money to spend different things based on what we just learned?
It has a very high consumption, and compared to some of the other countries, a relatively low investment. So maybe it needs to invest more in capital goods. And also, it imports more than it exports, so it has a negative trade deficit. So that's leakage. And government expenditure is 18%, which is more than India. So it looks good, yeah. But other than that, it looks like the other figures are not fantastic. Like consumption is really high, investment is okay, but it seems a little low, and the trade deficit.
Good. Excellent, Jamie. Thank you very much. That was a great analysis as well. And remember that the USA is the richest country in the world. So even if it's a 16%, it's a lot of money still. But proportionally speaking, if they use more of their proportion of their money to invest in more capital goods, maybe they will be growing faster in the future. Now, remember that 2 weeks ago, we saw that curve called the Solow model. And I told you that when you reach a plateau, that means that the countries may already have used their factors of production at its maximum. If we are at this stage, like the USA, they don't have too much room to invest more. Whereas in, let's say, Malawi, maybe they have a lot of land and a lot of resources to invest. So they will have room to invest more, like India, for example. Whereas in countries like what we call the industrialized countries, the investment is so few that we can do more. That's why it's so restricted. Maybe the investment is more in human capital, in education. Also, the investment could be also in technology, which is not necessarily related with physical expansion of firms. So interesting what you just mentioned, Jamie, which is also very accurate of what's happening in the USA. We can see how different countries can be seen, even ideologically. Countries with big government, like the UK, well, relatively big. Here we have a smaller government. We have a big government in China, almost 50%, well, almost 45% of the GDP is government expenditure. We have also Canada is relatively big compared to the USA, which is 18% of the GDP in terms of the size of the government, of how they are spending. Yeah, this is how you see how the biggest chunk of the GDP is the same as the USA. The GDP, the consumption has been increasing over time, and always we will see that the C, or the consumption, is one of the biggest chunks of the GDP. That's why we produce goods and services in an economy, for households to consume. Okay, if you want to do this as a homework just to understand your country, you don't need to submit it to me, but maybe it would be interesting to find the figures of your countries if you haven't seen them in the slides today, or if you want to update them to the latest year. Sometimes it's so difficult to find data, but if you are able to find it, then that will be part of your homework. I'm gonna leave it here because the next class we're gonna be making some more mathematics, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about calculations, which you are gonna be having an exercise to work on. Let me just stop sharing the screen. Okay, so I hope I didn't lose too many people. Let's see how, any questions or general comments before we finish today. I see that.
Yeah, just a different question. When you talk about recession, how did you define recession?
Good. Yeah, I was planning to go over there today, and you know, we can get really tired after half an hour of just talking, but let me define recession, and let me also answer the question about foreign or national incomes that I told you and Maja that I was going to answer that question earlier. So first of all, we will define a recession as the negative rate of growth of a country for more than 6 months, okay? For at least 6 months. If the country is not growing but degrowing, or the country is producing less and less and less for more than 6 months, technically we define that as a recession. So far, no country has reached that, mathematically speaking, but we expect in the next couple of months, many industrialized countries to reach that point when we measure their GDP. So that's when we will say the world is under a recession. So far, everybody's just speculating that we may not, but technically there's no recession. Once we measure the GDP decreasing over 6 months or more, then we can say for sure a recession is taking place. Now, we're talking about GDP growth. In this case, it's GDP degrowing. We're producing less than the last month, less than the last month, and less than the last month. And that's when a recession takes place. We will have a session just about recession and ways of dealing with that. Okay, Alan? Yeah. Let me finish with the question that Giovanni and Maja were asking, and also Alan, about incomes. I'm just going to refer to that very quickly today, but we will go to that next class. let's say that I'm gonna use practical examples. Maha, you have your hand raised. Maybe you want to ask first, and then I will go to this explanation to finish today.
No, I can wait until you finish your explanation.
Thank you. So I'm gonna make a simple example to understand the topic, the concept, okay? This is actually related with the difference between GDP and GNP. So I'm gonna go and share the screen because maybe that's gonna be even easier to explain the example. Just go here. We're gonna go to this later. Okay, so we already said gross domestic product measures whatever is being produced inside the boundaries of a country, regardless who produces that, okay? Let me go to the next slide. Now let's define gross national product. So I'm gonna use the example by saying, for example, William, okay? I'm gonna use the example of William because I understand that William is a citizen from the USA. Is that correct, William?
Yep. Yes.
Good. Thank you. Because that helps me to have the example in clear way. So you are actually a US citizen. You were born in the USA and you have the US passport, okay? Now you are living in Canada right now. That doesn't mean that you actually are a citizen of Canada unless you have a dual passport. Let's forget about that if that is the case, okay? So you are living in Canada, and let's say that for some reasons you start to work in Canada, okay? So right now you don't have school anymore. During the summer, you're gonna start producing and working if the COVID goes away. And let's say for the next 6 months, you're gonna be earning, let's say, $50,000. That's a lot. And let's say you're gonna be earning that amount of money by selling something to people, okay? You start your small business. However, once you have that $50,000 is gonna be counted in the GDP of Canada this year, okay? Because it was produced inside the boundaries of Canada. Now, we said that William is a US citizen. So far, he still has the money inside Canada. Maybe he's gonna spend the money inside Canada so that money remain in the GDP of Canada. But let's look at a different situation. Let's say that William produced $50,000 and he said, I'm gonna keep my dollars and I'm gonna take them to the USA because I'm moving in December and I will move back to the USA in December. He takes the money out of Canada and he goes to the USA and we will use this term, he will repatriate his profits, okay? His profits were generated in Canada, that's part of the GDP of Canada, but once he takes it out from Canada, you want to subtract that money from the GDP of Canada. So let's call it the factor income. Why it is called factor income? Because the factors of production, they generate income. Profits is a factor of production, remember. So if William repatriates his profits, so his profits are going to go out back to the USA, then we are subtracting those profits from the GDP of Canada. So at the end of the day, GDP of Canada minus 50,000 is gonna tell us the GNP of Canada, okay? If many Williams take their money out from Canada, that will be subtracted from the GDP of Canada and it will be added to the GNP of the USA, okay? Because it's a factor income that is entering to the USA because of William being a citizen from the USA, even if he produces the money in another country, okay? So this has to do a lot with the remittances question that William was asking before. If Guatemalan people, I'm gonna put my example, I'm from Guatemala too. If I produce in Canada or in the USA, I receive a salary. And part of my salary, let's say I will send that money to my mom who lives in Guatemala. That proportion of my income, which is a factor payment, remember the factor income, in this case, the wages, I'm repatriating portion of my wages to Guatemala. I'm sending it as remittances. So they have to be subtracted from the GDP of Canada and they will be added to the GNP of Guatemala, okay, as a sum, as an addition. But they will be a negative from the GDP of Canada. However, let's say there's a mining industry that is mining in Guatemala. So the GDP of Guatemala is big because all this mining is producing a lot of money inside the boundaries of Guatemala, okay? So the Guatemala GDP is going to be big because of the mining industry. However, when this mining industry, which is a Canadian mining company, repatriates its profits, we will subtract from the GDP of Guatemala minus these millions of dollars that are produced, and that will be the GNP of Guatemala, plus what I'm sending to my mom, okay? So the GDP, actually the difference between the GDP and the GNP is that from the GDP, we actually add the net value of this flow of the factor income. So here is the formula in this square. GDP plus the net factor income will be what we call it the gross national product, okay? The GNP. This net factor income for some countries could be a negative sign. That means that more people are sending money out than what they are receiving from the rest of the world. But also this could be a positive sign, which means the opposite. More people from the rest of the world are sending money back to this country compared to the money that is being sent to the other countries, like the one money that I sent to my mom to Guatemala, okay? So Canada, for example, could be an example. The remittances that are being sent back home are a small amount of money compared to the profits that are being received from the rest of the world because of all this investment. The USA is a good example because how many firms are actually in the world that belong to the USA? That was Maha's question. Let's say Nike is in China, so they are contributing to the Chinese GDP. But when the profits repatriate to the USA, China will lose a certain amount of its GDP and it becomes the GNP of China. And the GNP of the USA will grow because that money is flowing into the USA back, okay? And then we have to subtract from the USA what Chinese people are producing inside the USA and sending back to China. And that will even out maybe the values of GDP versus GNP between these two countries. So that has to do with income of people. It doesn't have to do with selling exports and imports. Remember, that's not related with selling goods. That's just talking about the money that is being sent because you earn it in a country and you are sending part of that money to other countries. That flow of money is what we call the factor income. And usually what happens is that people from a country send money back to their own country, even if they produce it in a different country. To finish this, if we can see China GDP and China GNP, look at 1980 and how over time, look at these values. In 1980, the GNP of China was the same as the GDP of China. So the difference here was zero. Who wants to answer what do you think happened in 1980 if this is the case?
China would be close to international economy, so they wouldn't have any companies outside of China.
Excellent. Excellent answer. Actually, China was an autarky, as we define autarky. Remember, China was a closed economy in the 80s. Actually, hardly they had investment from abroad, and also hardly they had Chinese people living abroad that they were sending money back. So the same amount of money was produced inside China. It never went out or in terms of factor income. So there was no difference in terms of factor income. Anyone else who wants to talk about the rest of the years based on these values that are negative and positive, or the difference between GDP and GNP?
Can I try? Or
yes, Maha, please.
Like, I feel like since it's negative, it means that they start to, like, foreign companies maybe start more and more to come to China. And then since it becomes positive, that means that Chinese companies start to go out of China and they start receiving more and more money from abroad.
Excellent. So in a simple way and a general way, exactly what Maha is saying is what is happening or has been happening in China. During the 80s, they actually opened their economy to the rest of the world. So they allow foreign firms to enter and produce. So look at the GDP, how much they produced more. They almost doubled their GDP. But actually, this is the amount of money that is flowing out of the country. And that's why their GNP is smaller than their GDP. Okay, 89, 89, 89, 64. Next year, same thing. Because foreign firms investing in China, their GDP grew, But once these firms were repatriating their profits, the GNP of China was smaller than the GDP by this amount. Now, afterwards, China actually was now investing in other parts of the world, and maybe they are already producing goods and services inside China that are not belonging to foreigners. So their GDP is bigger than their GNP. And here the same, GDP bigger than the GNP. So they actually are receiving more money from Chinese investment. Now they are investing in other parts of the world, and they are receiving the profits back. So now we can compare the GDP and GNP of a country depending on actually the net flow of income. Sometimes we say as economists that this is a more accurate way of looking at the real money that a country is making, because this is actually the money that is staying in the country after the flow out of profits from foreigners, plus the money that is being sent back home. So sometimes this is just a number that is not totally giving us the truth, but we'd rather use the GNP. So now that helped me a lot to move a lot from this concept of GDP and GNP. We can review it if you want, come back to the video, but I will give you an exercise during the week so you can work on the difference between GDP and GNP. Any other questions or final comments? If you had, Maha, you had a question, and if someone else, please ask.
Yeah, my question is very weird, but like I don't understand like the concept of GDP, how it makes a country actually rich. Because it's, let's say a country is very rich because everyone is buying bread and is buying shoes and blah, blah, blah. I don't like, it doesn't enter my mind how it's actually making a country rich, if it makes sense. I don't know. Like, can you, for example, tell me a story of a country that's very poor and then like consumption increases and how it becomes more, or maybe I'll just come to an understanding of this at the end of the lesson. I'm just very confused. So,
yeah, no, it's interesting because, you know, as after I study economics, I have it in my head so easy to understand the word like that. And I don't want actually to wash your brains and think like that, but it should make sense. If we are producing, let's say, a poor country, let's talk about a poor country would be a country that is producing very small amount of money measured in terms of GDP. So let's think about a country that produces, I'm gonna use simple numbers. Let's say one country produces $1 million per year. Now, if we divide $1 million per year over the population, and if we have a 1 million people, that will be $1 per person, okay? So in average, each person is earning $1 per year. That's a poor country. We call it a poor country because they are able to produce only $1 million with the factors of production that they have. Let's compare it to another country. Let's say a country that is being able to produce more, produce faster, they have machinery, they discover a way of producing in the same piece of land more fruits and veggies, and maybe the weather is also helping that country to produce more than the other country that we just mentioned. So they produce, and let's try to put it even more simple. Let's say these two countries have the same amount of factors of production, the same amount of people, but one country is able to produce faster because they discover a way of producing the land in a faster way. So they invented some technology. That technology is allowing that country to produce more apples per year, more corn per year, more whatever we think about that the land may be producing, more sugar per year, okay? Because they are producing more per year because of their technological progress, they should be able to receive more money when they sell those goods, okay? So instead of producing $1 million per year, they are producing $3 million per year. If they have 1 million people, then these people have $3 per year as income compared to $1 per year of this other poor country. So that's the concept that we want to play here with. Countries may be richer because they are more productive than other countries. Now, the theory tells us one thing, and then we can actually explore a lot more because some countries are more productive just because their land is really productive, okay? If you just drop one seed, in the next 2 weeks, you will see a tree flowing. But in like Canada, here, if I throw a seed, it will die tomorrow. So actually, the productivity of the land has to do with how that country may become rich or poor. But some people think, well, you know, tropical countries, their land is very productive, and they are the poor countries. versus the other countries of the world that they have strong winters, they don't have lots of productive land, and they are the rich countries. So the answer for that is that the rich countries were able to create machinery and investment of creating capital goods versus the other countries that are producing only potatoes and corn and sugar. So the two types of production, some goods are really cheaper to produce and to consume versus cars, t-shirts, computers, which are producing more money for these other people. So that's why we can compare the GDP of a country in terms of poor and rich countries. Very fascinating debate that we will go actually next year when we go to the development. But the main idea of GDP is to measure in monetary terms how much is being produced in a country.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Good. Laws that we have talked today, this is recorded if you want to review it again and go at your own pace. I'm going to put all of these in the webpage, and I will send an email to you. And I will also send an email with homework to do for next Thursday, okay? So the expectations for next Thursday are to work on that homework that I will send you via email. I will stop right now, and I hope that we are fine. If you have any final comments or questions over there for those who haven't spoken a lot, or also those who have participated a lot. Okay, so take care, guys. China is making a yoga session, I think, in 1 minute if you want to join her. Otherwise, stay safe. I will actually send you the emails. If you want to ask questions by email, please do so. I will try to answer them as soon as possible. Otherwise, we'll see you next Thursday at 3 p.m. with a new session, okay, with a new class. Sounds good?
Yeah, thank you so much, Samuel.
Thank you, Samuel.
Thanks, Samuel.
Okay, thank you. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.